without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our Mr. John Kennedy. He is going to introduce our speaker, and we are looking forward to this speaker today. So, John.
Yes, this is our second speaker in our month of April on the environment. Next week, we'll have Tara Zarinsky talking about Northampton County's plans on the environment. I saw in the newspaper that the Nurture Nature Center was involved in helping Easton come up with an environmental plan going forward, and immediately decided to call them and see if I could set up a program. And we've all been, that was very exciting because we've all been up there actually, or most of us. We held a meeting in the Nurture Nature Center and had lunch there. And as I remember, we had a great time that day. So it's with great pleasure, we had Kate Simmons with us today from the Nurture Nature Center. And unfortunately, I've done a poor job of getting a bio ahead of time, but I will ask Kate to tell us just a bit about herself before going forward with her presentation. I'll turn it over to Kate now.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. I've been with the Nurture Nature Center for about 7 years now. I got my PhD in Earth and Environmental Sciences from Lehigh University, and then did some work with the USDA down in Washington, DC before I found my way to the Nurture Nature Center. And I helped develop the science education programs that we provide. I do a lot with the grants that we get to improve our materials for outreach. And I apologize for the background noise. The hazards of working from home is that I have little ones around. I'm really excited to talk to you about the climate work that we've been doing for the city of Easton. And we've also helped the city of Bethlehem too. So I'll talk about that just a little bit in my presentation. And so with that, I'm gonna, Bill, if you could let me share my screen, I have some slides.
You should be able to share it now.
And that is the sweetest voice ever. So Kate, don't feel bad. We want to hear that. We want to hear that baby's voice.
Well, just pick her up and hold her while you're making a presentation. I think that'll be a natural nature thing, huh?
So I have two, right? I have a 6-week-old, and then I have this. So this is a 6-week-old, and then this is the
Oh,
how special.
Almost 2-year-old. So,
oh my God.
And then I have a 5-year-old back there. But yeah,
You're
I can't.
super mom. You're super mom. Well, we don't care. We don't care. So you do whatever you need to do, and we think
it's been this virtual stuff has been a little challenging, but it's working.
There you go.
Okay. So just trying to get the slideshow up. All right, so you guys are familiar with us at the Nurture Nature Center. No, thank you. But I wanted to talk to you specifically about our work with the climate action in the city of Easton. So the city of Easton signed on to this agreement that's called the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy back in 2016. And this is it's an international agreement that cities across the world have signed on to. I believe there's over 10,000 signatories, which basically say we voluntarily commit to taking climate action and reducing our emissions. We agree that climate change is an issue. And the process that you are voluntarily committing to is a 3-year process where you develop a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So you're taking account to all of your fossil fuel emissions. Then you have a vulnerability assessment. So you're looking at the physical environment, your social demographics, and trying to decide where the vulnerabilities are in your city related to climate change. And then in year 3, you are developing this target. So say you want to reduce your emissions by 80% by 2050. That's Easton's goal for right now. You need a plan to get there. And so that's a climate action plan, and one that we have been currently working on. So I said 2016. So ideally this would have been done in 2019, 2020. But there's been a little bit of hiccups along the way. There's been staff turnovers and lack of funding to complete this. And luckily this year, we found out about a program that the state is putting on through the Department of Environmental Protection that links cities with local college students to do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory and a climate action plan. And they've connected us with a consultant who does climate action plans, like that's all they do, called ICLEI. And so we've been spearheading that process because the city doesn't really have anyone to do this. So we've been working with that college student to do this process this year. And previously we had helped the city with a prior greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And we also did the vulnerability assessment for them. So a vulnerability assessment is, as I mentioned, is really looking at how the landscape characteristics and the social demographics play into climate change impacts. And for Easton, we focused on flooding and extreme heat events. And so for extreme heat events, these are days that are above 90 degrees. Usually the nighttime temperature doesn't drop below 70, which poses a health problem because you aren't able to cool down the body, especially if you don't have air conditioning or any means to cool down. And so these days are projected to increase by 40 to 50 days. That's, having all of summer being above 90 degrees. That's something that we really have to be thinking about and trying to adapt for, especially for those lower income populations who don't have air conditioning or don't have a means for cooling down. We also found that in the future with climate change, increased temperatures lead to more moisture in the atmosphere. The atmosphere can hold more moisture, and this leads to increased risk of flooding from heavy precipitation events. So this is those events where you're driving along and you have to pull over on the side of the road because you can't see anything. There's just so much rain coming all at once. And kind of like those thunderstorms in the summer afternoon when it's really hot and sticky and it's going to break, that's the type of events that are projected to increase in the future. That leads to flash flooding. And flash flooding is really hard to forecast and predict. And it can be very deadly because it affects more localized areas, so smaller tributaries and streams. And it can cause severe erosion. If you're there and not in a safe place, you could get swept away. It also causes problems with flooding of roadways. And sometimes people drive into flooded roadways, which is a big no-no. Because you don't know how fast that water is moving or how deep it is, and you could be swept away. So these were the two main hazards that we were focusing on for this report. And then just to give a little bit of background about the climate change, in the last 10 years, Easton had 6 major flood events. We've had a temperature change of about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We had 30 to 60 extreme heat warnings, 30 fewer days below freezing. So some people might think that's good, and it is, but for agriculture, it presents a problem because certain crops like apples need to have a certain number of cold days. And it also helps to kill off pests. So one of the reasons that one of the contributing factors to more Lyme's disease in the state is because of these lack of really cold temperatures in the winter to kill off the ticks. So the ticks are able to overwinter, increase their numbers, increase the chances of transmitting Lyme's disease to people. Now, there are other factors too, like we're encroaching more and more into wooded territories, and there's more people going out in those areas, but this is also a contributing factor. And then this graph here is showing the observed changes that we've seen from last century to this century. Sorry, it's from 1986 to 2016. That's the period that we're measuring against, and it's comparing to 1901 to 1960. And we're seeing an increase mostly across the northern and western parts of the country, and it's different between winter and summer. So we're seeing more changes in winter, and you're seeing more changes to the coldest days of the year, and some change to the warmest day of the year. So what they're projecting for the future is by 2050, it could be 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit more, so above that. And then by the end of the century, 2100, it's 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And these years seem really far off, but it's likely that grandchildren will be experiencing these. It's likely that my children will be experiencing some of these impacts. So they're coming much more quickly than, 10 or 20 years ago, the scientists had been projecting. And this is just pulled from the Pennsylvania State Climate Action Plan that shows the projection of that increase towards the end of the century. This is showing information from the vulnerability assessment that's showing the actual changes here in Easton and the number of extreme heat events that we've had in the past decade or so. But I mentioned that we are expecting an increase of 40 to 50 of these days in a year by 2050. And then flooding, I'm sure many of you Easton residents are familiar with the flooding that happened in 2004, 5, and 6. And then we had our hurricane, the flood of record, which was from 1955 with Hurricane Diane and Hurricane Connie. And so this is just a list of those top 10 flooding events that affected Easton. So as part of the report, we looked at the floodplain from FEMA. That's mapped here in light blue. And then we also looked at impervious surfaces. So these are roads, concrete, asphalt, anything that doesn't allow water to infiltrate slowly into the ground. And that allows water to run off very quickly, and it contributes to flooding. So if you want to mitigate flooding and the rise of the rivers, you need more green infrastructure. You need the soil to slowly take it up. Trees store an enormous amount of water. So you want more green and less gray and black. And so you're seeing here those areas where they overlap. So definitely downtown is at risk for increased flooding because we have a lot of impervious surfaces in the floodplain. The floodplain is mapped. This is, we like to say the river is dynamic. It has its real estate and it's going to choose to occupy it when it wants. And we are choosing to live in that its real estate. So it's not an if, it's a when as to when the waters will affect that area, which they did in 2004, 5, and 6. And then we also looked at social vulnerability. So we considered areas where there were children, elderly, where there were people with disabilities and low income. And we found that the most vulnerable parts of the city were down along the river and downtown, which we can focus resources on knowing this information. And so the conclusion of that vulnerability assessment was that downtown and West Ward are considered the two most vulnerable areas due to the physical characteristics and the social characteristics, that the city needed to really focus on those for the short and long term. After that, after we did that report, we presented to City Council and they voted and agreed to a emissions reduction target of 80% by 2050, which was common at this time. They adopted this in 2018. And what we're seeing now is a lot of cities are looking at net zero. So that net zero goal means you're not necessarily not doing any emissions, that's impossible, but you have mitigating strategies in place, like you have trees that are taking up carbon, or you're purchasing carbon credits that essentially get your bottom line even. And the city of Bethlehem, that's their goal by 2040 that they just released. And that is actually the science-based target that Easton should have. So with this climate action plan, we're going to focus on the 80% that has already been adopted, but also recommend the city look to possibly a net zero if possible in the future. So as I mentioned, we just redid the emissions inventory, and this is the results. So we broke it down by sector, 6 sectors: industrial, residential, commercial, transportation, waste and water. Now, waste and water are a very small portion of the overall. The majority are through residential energy. So this is through the electricity and natural gas. And then the energy used by industrial and commercial. Transportation is about 17%. And so these are the numbers. And then this is just a little bit of background. I'm going to go through this quickly so we have more time for questions. But this is how we got the emissions data, what they were based on. And this is based on methodology that other cities are using. The program that we're participating in with the state has 21 other municipalities, including Allentown, participating. And they did one last year with another 20. So there are 40 municipalities throughout Pennsylvania that are doing this program. So why do we need to develop a climate action plan? Well, it helps us reach that goal. There's a number of incentives. We can get additional help from the state and students to help try to implement the plan if we complete it by June 30th. So it's a very compressed timeline. The Bethlehem process took over a year. This process I'm trying to do in just the spring semester, but it definitely is doable and something that we're on track to do. And it makes us a leader. The state has a plan, other neighboring cities have a plan. This is a little bit background about the Bethlehem process, because there's a lot of similarities there. So this is all of the stakeholders that they involved in their process. And like I said, it took over a year. And so the climate action plan itself has 2 main purposes, and that's to put forward strategies to reduce emissions. So this is making buildings more energy efficient, making public transportation more accessible, but also making it so that there's adaptation and measures involved. So that's getting back to the vulnerability assessment and saying, well, we know that extreme heat is going to be an issue, so let's make sure that we have a cooling center for those who might not have air conditioning, or a place for kids to run and in the water downtown so that they can cool off in those really hot days. And then it focuses on a number of different benefits, environmental, social, and economic. And this is more about what the climate action plan entails. What the different strategies in the plan focus on are buildings, so that's the energy efficiency, transportation, local food and waste, the sourcing of your energy, if you can get it from renewable sources, education, and then land use and green space. And then environmental justice is a big issue that we are trying to include throughout the plan, and one that Bethlehem focused on. So these were Bethlehem's proposed commitments. Again, I mentioned they wanted to get to net zero by 2040. And then they also were suggesting to develop an office of sustainability within the city and a director to run that. And I think we're going to try to get that as a recommendation in the Easton's climate action plan as well. And then they had smaller sector goals related to those larger goals, everything from maximizing green space, to having a climate challenge to get residents and businesses on board. And then they had really specific ones. So investing in energy efficiency projects or coordinating working groups. So those are just some strategies. And when you put all those strategies together, you get this roadmap of how you can get to your goal. So we are currently working on one of these graphs for Easton, looking at a number of strategies and how they will get us to that goal by 2050. This is the goal of the state. So the state says that they want to reduce overall emissions by 80% by 2050. Science at the time that they did this back in mid 2000 said that that was an achievable goal and one that would help keep us below this 2 degrees Celsius threshold. And they also talk about adapting to changes. So they put forward a bunch of different strategies that they're using in the state, and we're using this kind of as a basis for developing strategies specific to Easton. So everything from stormwater best management practice to reducing waste, and then making more public transportation options and the like. So about our current plan, we have a website. There's a link there, and I can put that in the chat too, that has all the information on the climate action plan process for Easton, and we update that as things are changing. We had an online public survey in March, and we collected about 150 responses. And that was really just trying to get people's input on the goals, objectives, priorities, and strategies that we would use in the climate action plan. And then we're planning to have a public meeting, which we would love to have all of you at, and spread the word to your neighbors, friends, family. And that's going to be on Tuesday, May 25th from 7 to 8. And we'll be sharing draft elements of the plan and asking for feedback both during the meeting and then through email to me or online submission through the webpage. And then what we've been doing, because we know that not everybody is connected virtually, we've been trying to connect to members of the community through phone calls and doing short interviews to get more information so that we get a diverse representation of Easton. It's hard with COVID. We can't really go door to door to get input like we might have in the past. But we have a pretty diverse stakeholder group that's helping advise us on the process. And we hope to have the draft, a final draft by end of June when the process, the state program that we're part of wants them. So again, this is the flyer for the meeting in May, the end of May, and I can send this around to anyone if they're interested. You need to register to attend. And then I just wanted to show a little bit about what we've asked. So one of the things that we're trying to get a sense of from community members is what their priorities are, what they think is most important for the community. And that's everything from health to being prepared for natural disasters, saving money. So a lot of the strategies that we're putting forward have co-benefits. If you are doing energy efficiency upgrades to your house, you're saving yourself money, you're saving the environment, and you're also improving the health of people through improved air quality. So there's a number of different things that we've been asking about and trying to focus on. And then one other project I wanted to quickly plug for that Nurture Nature Center has been working on since 2018 is a project called Create Resilience. And this is really connected to our climate action work because it's trying to educate the community about natural hazards and make them more resilient to those changes in the future that are going to be affected by climate change. So how are we being affected by flooding now, and how is that going to change in the future? And we've worked with a number of youth ambassador teams on this. We've held a number of community events, and we're currently working with 3 artists in the community to develop these large-scale murals that show a vision of what the community should look like We're calling it a community vision of resilience that's been informed by a lot of the surveys and meetings that we've had the past 2 years. Because it's one thing to tell people you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. It's another thing to provide a positive image of where you want to get to in the future. We find that to be much more motivating than saying, no, it's bad that you leave the lights on, that type of thing. And so one of the things that we did with this project was survey the community to find out. Massimo, I need you to be next to her. Massimo, please. So we asked about the hazards in the community. Flooding, of course, came out on top, but interestingly, but not as surprisingly, downtown Easton was more worried about flooding than, say, Palmer, because flooding isn't as prominent there. Although the surrounding municipalities do contribute to their land use practices do contribute to flooding risk in downtown. We asked if they felt prepared and knowledgeable about natural hazards. Most did, but there were some that were kind of on the fence. So we knew that there was a need to increase education. We talked to municipal leaders about this as well, and they felt that the residents weren't knowledgeable, but they had similar rankings of the hazards that were of most concern. And then we did hazard tours. So we took our youth ambassadors around to look at areas which had been affected by flooding or were areas that were going to be impacted by winter storms, that type of thing. And that was one of the programs we did that they really liked the most. We also did a virtual version of this last year that we called resiliency tours, where we were taking a positive spin and looking at how places are adapting to the changes. So places where they did riparian buffers and a number of others. We gathered stories in the community. We actually had our youth help us with this, about people who've been affected by these hazards and how they are adapting. So the one right there in the middle is Dan Hunter, and they have a farm, and he was talking a lot about the changes that they have to do with higher temperatures and more erosion from these heavy precipitation events. And then this was pre-COVID, we had a really nice gathering of everybody and to see those stories and photos on our wall, and discussed more about what they wanted Easton to do related to these hazards and being more prepared and resilient in the future. And we've used this approach before, and we found it to be very successful, to use those hazards as an entry point to be talking about climate, because there are some people who are very distrustful of some information related to climate. And if you come and talk to them about how they're actually being affected in their community, they're more open to listening to the science behind that. And then before I wrap up, I just want to plug one more event that we have that you might be interested in coming to or sharing with your networks. We have a Arbor Day event that we're doing with the city on Friday, April 30th at 5:30 p.m. We're going to meet at the Blue Bridge on the Carl Sterner Arts Trail. And we're asking residents to nominate a tree, because we found in a lot of our surveys that people around town don't like trees, mainly because of the cost in maintaining them. But trees are very, very important for the health of our environment and for addressing climate change. And so we're trying to switch that and make it more positive, and having people nominate their favorite trees so we can put it on a poster. And so we'll be releasing those on at this event, and also celebrating the city of Easton as a tree city, which they've been for 21 years. We have a great city forester. And then to be a tree city, you have a tree board or department, you have an ordinance related to community trees, and you spend a certain amount of money on your urban forestry, and that you celebrate Arbor Day, which is what we're doing with this event. So with that, I can take questions. So sorry, I'll go back to it.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I know that other cities, like down south, some cities have the opportunity to buy low, well, to get trees that they can plant in their yards. Like some communities, they will, if you agree to maintain the tree for, the next year or the next 2 years, to make sure you're watering it and that. Have you thought about doing any, does anybody do that within the Easton area as far as
Yes.
taking it a step further and offering a tree to be planted in somebody's yard? To, you said there was people that didn't like them. I can't imagine that because I love trees, but
Yeah. So the Rob Christopher, he's the city forester. He's awesome, and he might be someone that you want to have come speak at some point in the future. He does. The city does offer free trees. The problem is that the city doesn't have the funds or the manpower to maintain the tree, and especially in that first year of life, you need to water and make sure that it's growing well and not affected by like the emerald ash borer or spotted lanternfly. And he has come up against a lot of people who are very angry. They don't want a tree on their property. They don't want a tree because of that cost. And in the past, we have planted trees that were not good in an urban environment. So that's why you have the roots that are tripping people and pushing up the sidewalks. But the trees that Rob is planting now are specifically, their characteristics make them suitable for these environments, and they're not going to uproot the sidewalks. But it's still hard to change people's mind. And he would tell a story of like, he planted a tree and the homeowner actually poisoned the tree because he didn't want it. So it's concerning. One thing that we are considering as a strategy for the climate action plan is to have city ownership of the street trees at least, so that we can ensure that that's not a burden on homeowners, especially for places that have like those out-of-state landlords. They don't necessarily care about the tree and take care of the tree. So if we are able to get the street trees under the care of the city, that might be a step forward. And then Rob has been doing a lot with a native tree garden that he did in Hackards Park, and has been trying to increase the trees throughout the city. So he's really great, and I can connect him to you if you're interested in talking with him.
I think that sounds like a good program. No, that sounds like an excellent potential speaker for our group. But I never had I never knew that people didn't. I know people don't like trees for various reasons, such as, being when they get so tall and then, you have storms come in and they're afraid of them damaging their homes. But I never thought about just not having any trees in a yard. So that's different. I never thought about people having that perspective. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Does anybody else have some questions?
John's got a question there raised.
Morning. Thank you so much, Kate. I think you're extremely, your group is extremely brave for attempting to do this. It's such a complex problem in terms of getting. I mean, it's actually not a very complex problem in terms of global warming. It's from my point of view. I'm really glad you showed us the Bethlehem plan, because hopefully Easton will get competitive and pick up on that. The problem I see with Easton is as far as the city and the people who run the city and maybe the residents, is there's considerable lip service to the question of doing something about the environment. But the terms of actual action, I see, well, my solar panel installer is telling me that Easton's a very hard place to do anything in because they have like a regulation that's a 6-foot setback. So, I say Easton is going to put aesthetics ahead of doing something about global warming. And I see the buildings, the city buildings and the schools, and I don't see any plan for solar energy or using solar panels in those buildings, even though they're very new and very recent. So I really appreciate someone at least opening the conversation and trying to do something because I'm thinking this is really a pretty steep hill to climb here in Easton.
Skip, there you go.
Kate, I know a little bit about your youth ambassador program because my grandson participated in the last 2 years. But how did your plan address the air quality when we have two major highways? 122 goes right through the city and 78 is just south of the city.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the climate action plan and our emissions are really limited to the city boundary. That's the limit of our data. There is a gap in terms of the cross community highways, the warehouses that are out in the periphery of Easton, the increased plane traffic from Amazon at ABE. All of those things are not necessarily being considered in the plan. What we are hoping to do is really push for a public transportation system, like a light rail or something that connects Easton to, say, Philadelphia or New York, definitely Bethlehem and Allentown. And that would be a way to try to reduce the traffic that's going right by us, that's contributing to the air quality, especially because we're in this Lehigh Valley, which traps a lot of that pollution down close to where we're breathing. But that's a larger issue and it's going to require regional collaboration. But I think, and also to the point from John, is that just getting this on paper and getting the plan out there is a good first step because it's holding them accountable. And we have seen those issues too. Like they say that they want to be green and that they want to make progress, but there's always a barrier. So we're really going to try to focus on reducing those barriers and pushing forward strategies that might seem kind of radical. Like, why can't downtown be just pedestrians and bikes? Do we need to have traffic in downtown? Is there a way that we can basically design our city so that it's more friendly to alternative modes of transportation to help with those air quality issues? Definitely that solar panel ordinance needs to be changed. That's an easy first step and one that we'll be pushing for. And I know Tara will be talking more to you guys about that at your next meeting. But there's lots of different strategies and I think that Easton really needs to consider them seriously.
And I have read that in terms of solar panels, that up to half the cost of installing solar panels is simply the cost that the company charges you for dealing with the regulations that various places have. And I say that's so amazing that in other words, to put a $25,000 project in, it costs you $50,000.
Yeah.
Kate, the dollar always seems to rule, and I'm wondering if there is a better way as going forward to make more economic incentive built into the process, the gains and reductions of expenses that occur for the investment today, and how we can use what finances we do have today to begin to address this more effectively.
Yeah, so definitely, upfront costs are going to be more for some of these strategies. But if you look over the long term, there's saving money. And so one way we're hoping to get around that issue is to talk about those co-benefits. So energy efficiency, yes, it's going to cost you money to upgrade to a newer furnace, or to switch to, you might have to pay a few cents more if you're getting pure 100% renewable energy from your provider. But in the long run, it's going to have these additional benefits that people need to start to consider, instead of just that hard bottom line. Right now, what am I paying? And so the city is making some progress. They're changing out their light bulbs for LEDs. That saves some money. They don't have to change them as much. It reduces maintenance costs. So there's a lot of no-brainers there. I think some of the reticence is political, or this is the way that we do things, or just not having the push or the motivation to do them. Like, someone needs to take the lead. And that's why we're hopeful that if there's a specific position at the city that's focusing on these and saying, whenever they have those meetings, like, should we put an RFP out to develop this plan, that they say, well, maybe there's a better solution there. Like, just to be kind of a voice there to put forward these solutions when the city is making those decisions. But it's always a consideration. I'm hopeful with the new administration that there might be some assistance to move towards helping develop more support for people to take these strategies, be it through energy efficiency improvements, or even just establishing more green jobs. So people being trained to do these things and really pushing, this is, what we need to move towards. But I'm more hopeful than I've ever been, and I've been in this field for a while. I see a lot of hope in our youth. I see a lot of hope in kind of the direction that people are moving. The fact that a lot of the automobile manufacturers are saying, well, electric is the way to go. So I don't know, I'm still hopeful.
Yeah, let me take a moment just to talk about money in a macro sense. There's been, I've seen estimates that in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, which is what we really need to do, it would cost at least $1 trillion a year for the U.S. to achieve carbon neutrality. I got to playing with the figure, and I said, well, that's about $3,000, a little over $3,000 per person, for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And then I said to myself, wait a minute, how much were the 3 stimuluses? 3 stimuluses are $3,200 for each person. Now, you consider then it doesn't come down to whether we have the money, it comes down to how you want to spend it.
We have to think about this as an investment too, and you have, in any budget that you make, you have to take care of some immediate needs. But we always tell our kids when they're growing up, put aside 10% or put whatever it is aside to be a savings in the future. And we need to encourage our elected officials, where most of the money really has to come from government for these really big projects, and encourage them to be investing in our future and in our children. They're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of a lot of this. We're already bearing the brunt of changes, but to see the future the way you present it is really kind of scary, honestly.
Hi. With Arbor Day coming up and Earth Day, are there any plans to go into the schools with brochures or something like that? or have a speaker go in and talk to the children, elementary, intermediate, middle school, high school. A good venue for that would be contact the local PTAs, because they're always looking for ways to reach out to their parents. So.
Yeah, so we reached out to Paxenosa when we were doing the survey, and we had a flyer about climate action and in our plan, and we went and we actually were on the, like at drop off, we stood there and we're trying to get input from families that way. But as for our programming, we normally are like reaching out to schools. We normally have classes coming. We have our outreach educator going to the elementary schools and doing programs, and he's always very well received. But this year, we haven't yet gotten back to our normal operating because of COVID. So we're still not open yet. We're hoping by summer. We actually have a create and learn series that we're doing this summer related to birds and migration. And we always interweave like concepts of reduce, reuse, recycle throughout our programs and how climate change is affecting birds and migrations. So that's going to be our first like foray back into normal operations, and seeing how we can make it work with our space and trying to keep everybody healthy. But definitely a good point. Keeping the youth engaged and educated is key.
The other thing that amazes me is in my backyard are all these warehouses, and they are, I mean, like 500 feet from a railroad track. Wasn't there anything in the planning of all these industrial areas to try to encourage the developer to put it by a railroad and use the railroad? Because that seems to me to be a real good way for environmental awareness. I don't know, but.
Yeah, or if you're putting in these huge concrete structures, at least put solar panels on top.
Yes.
You know, there's lots of things that could be done, but I think that it was very rushed. I mean, they popped up overnight.
They did.
And they were helping financially strapped municipalities who didn't see any other way, unfortunately, at that time. So I'm not confident that a lot of planning
went through. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It was very interesting.
Hey, I want to thank you for the comprehensiveness of your plan. I think another factor in being able to move ahead is to be able to take one step at a time or see each step, so you can say, well, we can do that. And then that's, well, we can do that. If you can see accomplishable goals for each year and how it ends up getting it to the final goal, that's very helpful. It seems overwhelming in some ways when you just say, we have to fix climate change. My God, that's like, change the universe. But I think you've broken it down in a way that's very helpful. And I wanted to also ask what the role of the not-for-profits, what that role is going forward. Of course, your own not-for-profit is playing a big role, but I'm wondering about all the wilderness societies and the variety of other organizations that are interested in the environment. What role do you see them having in helping this to happen?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I see our role largely as education and connecting. So I don't know that we would have be at this place if we hadn't been there looking for opportunities to assist the city and moving forward. So I definitely see the nonprofits as helping move the needle on this. Many of the other nonprofits in the region, Jacobsburg, the Wildlands, they have their own specific missions that they're going towards, but they are all considering climate change. It's a big thing for everyone. And so they're considering it in their operations and their education and what they do. Wildlands is doing a tremendous work with restoring habitat, which certainly helps. That everybody's educating children to appreciate nature, which I think is more critical now than ever, because if you don't have that connection to nature, you're not going to want to save it. And unfortunately, with the proliferation of video games and everything being online, I really fear for those students who lose that connection. There is a new movement that's just slowly starting to gain speed called nature schools. And so these are smaller schools that are purposely keeping kids outdoors and really trying to get them to appreciate nature. It's a different form of learning instead of just sitting inside at a desk and just, working on paper or any more these days. It's on a computer. And so I see that continuing to grow because it's vital for kids' development and for all of our future. Because if they don't know nature, if they don't feel comfortable in nature, it's a problem.
Kate, I've got a question for you. I'm going to put you on the spot. I've been thinking about this. As a new mom several times over recently, do you use diapers or do you use disposable diapers?
So that is an interesting question. So they both are environmentally harmful because the amount of washing you need to do to keep up with the reusable diapers is almost equivalent to using the disposable. But after you get past, like when you have more than one child in diapers, you just go disposable because there's no way you're going to be sane if you're doing that. So yes, this is one of my guilty environmental footprint things. But I'm also hoping to raise environmentally conscious children who will hopefully.
But we also come from a generation, at least I do, that you could put your laundry outside and wash it and hang it outside. We live in a 55 and older community where you can't put up a wash line. You can't do something like that. And there are communities, and it's tough to even think about putting your laundry out on the line today. But I sat here thinking about this and I thought to myself, that's one of the big issues. Today everybody wants disposable. And I just think about the fact that there was a message on Channel 69 this morning about particles of plastic in the atmosphere, and do you use disposable bottles and things? Because basically everybody does. And I thought to myself, it starts with our hospitals. My wife's been in the hospital lately twice recently, and everything that is used for her, whether it be a needle, a bottle, just the basin that you wash yourself in, it's all disposable. A hospital doesn't use anything over, and that all, it's great to say it starts at home and we don't want to have a hospital having any contamination. I understand that. But I mean, that's what you see in life. So how to get people to think otherwise is very, very difficult. That's a challenge, big challenge. Could you tell us about what you're going to be doing down on Bushkill Drive with Eastern Iron and Metal just announced, or aren't you aware of that yet?
No, we're aware of that. It's still very much in its preliminary stages. We have a vision for the space, but we do not have funding to implement that vision, and we do want it to be a collaboration with the city and Lafayette and the Carl Sterner Arts Trail. And so they put it out for RFP, and hopefully a developer will take our vision and at least try to keep some of the essence of that. But that was kind of our like pie in the sky dream. And I think it's good to have like a vision of out there, even if it's not attainable, of what it could be, and something to aim for. You know, you shoot for the moon and you make your way into the stars. So it remains to be seen how it'll be developed.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing the bigger vision. A lot of communities have went to, a smaller organization, that is more focused in on sustainability. Are there any 501(c)(3)? I mean, is there anything here that is just, strictly looking at Easton and what we can do as community members of Easton to make our community better? I know that there's many places that have done that, and they have been quite successful in getting people to be more aware of, using the use of plastic bags, such as what Bill is saying, and outdoor play environments, recycling art centers, things where children can be outside and do art. Is there any organization that's really geared towards that? Has there?
Specifically in Easton, not that I'm aware, besides us and sort of how we're trying to, it's not our sole mission, but it is, we are definitely working towards improving Easton through education and trying to improve the spaces. So I'm trying to think of.
So what can we do to help you? What can we do to help nurture nature?
That's a good question. I think, just following and supporting us in our events, participating in the events and spreading the word is helpful. It's kind of hard to answer now just because we're still like in this tenuous transition zone where we're trying to get back up to what our new normal will be. But we can definitely stay in touch and let you know as things progress.
I look forward to the day when we can come down and enjoy your facility again. It's wonderful down there.
It's great.
That's neat.
Glad
Our
to hear.
club's been there twice since they've opened, and unfortunately, both of those times, my wife and I could not be there.
Oh, you have to come next time.
Well, on that note, we want to say thank you, Kate, for bringing a great presentation. I apologize for my parents.
Round of applause.
Screeching. A round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing so much, because this is benefiting all of us. So you are touching each one of our lives by focusing in on our environment and what's and helping this to come to fruition.
You're an
wish you much
inspiration.
Success.
Oh, thank
We
you.
wish you continued success, because we want it to, we want your children to benefit from, a long and to be able to enjoy our nature, our environment. So thank you so much. We appreciate you coming out, and thank you, John, for setting that up. Yes, John.
I do have one thing to say, actually. Just by the way, Dan Hunter spoke to us last week.
Oh, great. Awesome. So
Yes.
And Kate, two of the people you're looking at right now are driving electric cars.
Awesome.
Ann drives one electric and one gas, and I drive one electric and one plug-in hybrid. John, you're driving a hybrid, right?
2 hybrids, and Ken has an electric. Ken has a pure electric.
Terrific.
And Kate, I was in the petroleum and gasoline business all of my life.
Okay.
I won't hold it against you. Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. I
Great
appreciate it.
presentation. Thank you. Great.
Was
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You know, I
That's-
meant to tell you all
Okay.
that Bill Gates says that he does have a private plane, and folks were criticizing him for that, but he said he balances it off. So
Mm.
I think that's what we'll look at doing.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
You got your bell, Jen?
Thank you.
I did.
There you go.